Hey. Oh, there we go. Cool. Hi, thanks for coming. Excited to talk to you guys about this a little bit. So context in DAO UX, we'll talk about context, and specifically why standard proposals will simplify collective action. I'm working at Seasons. My background, My background, I'm Duncan. I've worked on a few different projects in the past that you may know me from, but currently I'm working at Seasons. It is a platform to fractionally own and manage NFT assets. And it's actually really convenient that the previous talk was the Gnosis team, because we're essentially a factory for the SafeSnap DAO pattern and that framework. So we fractionalize NFTs into governance tokens, and you're able to manage those NFTs as a DAO. The little diagram over here is essentially the contracts at a very high level, obviously, that we're using. We're using the safe in the middle, the DAO module around that, and then a token contract to actually manage those fractional NFTs, if that makes sense. Sweet. Some ground rules for the presentation too. I would love this to be interactive, so I will be asking sort of questions throughout this time. We're going to go through the definition of context, the context in DAOs, why context is important in DAOs, challenges, which is kind of a big piece of the presentation, and then simplifying context with standard proposals. So we want to make this a conversation. I'm going to ask questions. Please raise hands. I would like to keep kind of conversation to maybe a minute or so. But I would like this to be more of an interactive thing rather than me just kind of telling you things, because I think the collective knowledge in this crowd, I'm sure, is going to be useful to continue to fill out some gaps in information. And anything we don't get to, we can table for the end. So first, the definition of context. I think this is actually pretty interesting. I looked this up on the Google, on Google. I was like, what is the definition? And it actually has the example of using context to pass a proposal in some European governmental directive. The proposals need to be considered in the context of new European directives, right? So context is inherent in understanding how to make decisions as a group of humans, right? Which I think is pretty fitting for why we need to have collective context in DAOs in order to make decisions and pass proposals, create proposals, etc. The way that context is built also is dependent or determined to some extent by the DAO framework, right? This is a really fun little diagram that I think I'm attempting to explain the difference between maybe permissioned organizations that act with a more centralized decision-making party and a more decentralized system that has autonomous incentives driving the actual DAO part of it. And also, just to give some context for the room, how many, by raise of hands, how many are involved with DAOs today? Maybe a member or, okay, nearly everyone. Amazing. And then, how many feel like the context for those DAOs you're involved in are easy and sort of straightforward to grasp, both as a member or a newbie? Okay, no one. Amazing, okay. So context in DAOs is inherently complex, right? But we need to make decisions via proposals. And that's kind of, again, why is context important? Because we need to make decisions. So challenges today, I'm sure none of you will have, this won't be surprising, right? Everyone is pretty aware of challenges in DAOs today. And essentially, decentralized participation, or decentralization really requires the participation in these democratic DAO systems that we're building in general, right? Otherwise, it's then just a unilateral decision by some minority party. And that participation requires context. The reason context is so hard to grasp is because you have to filter through forums and read long essays with many different links to fully understand what a proposal is actually, what is the consequence of this proposal. And as a voting participant, why am I voting for this in one way or the other? How do I even make a decision about having an opinion on this? I first need to be a research analyst and get to the bottom of the outcome, right? It just takes quite a bit of time. And no one wants to read those essays, essentially. So yeah, I think, in general, the proposal systems are kind of like herding cats. And we have Snapshot, though, which I will say is the kind of premium proposal system today. It's like the most effective, or the probably most used system that we have. By raise of hands, has anyone had a proposal made on Snapshot or made a proposal on Snapshot? Epic. Okay, so like half the room. And then has anyone made a proposal with a transaction attached to that proposal? Sweet. Like a 10% of the room. Okay, beautiful. The reason I say that is because actually so Snapshot, I guess in the previous presentation, it was discussed that Snapshot is usually used with a Gnosis safe that has some multi-sig signers. Decisions are made in the Snapshot, or sentiment is gathered in the Snapshot vote, and then it's pushed to the multi-sig signers as being responsible parties to execute. But with the SafeSnap governance framework, you're able to actually put a transaction that can be placed on chain through the Snapshot interface. It's just that you need to be essentially a developer to place that transaction in the first place and create the transaction. And so that's kind of a painful experience if you're trying to build a consumer-grade product for people who don't necessarily have Web3 knowledge. They just kind of want a cool NFT or some exposure to a cool NFT. So yeah, to my point, general frameworks and the framework that is currently in Snapshot is really good for developers, but it is not great for people who don't have that technical knowledge, right? Not great for most people that are interacting with these systems. Additionally, that sort of process and this difficulty in gathering context does result in sort of attack vectors for these DAO systems to then be exploited by malicious actors who do have the technical knowledge to submit proposals, and sort of take advantage of those who don't have the right safeguards in place to prevent them from stealing treasury funds, etc. So we want DAOs to be effective, right? It's somewhat difficult with the general frameworks today. But we don't want that burden, right, to vote and gather context. And in order to simplify context, at Seasons, this is something we've thought about quite a lot. And I think there's a number of different ways to simplify context. It's a nice problem for us to solve as well as a platform because we have a relatively specific type of DAO we are dealing with. We're dealing with DAOs who are fractionalizing NFT ownership, which isn't necessarily as risky as some of these DeFi systems or complex as updating a protocol, right? You generally have a few different actions that are done over and over again. And so that queue standard proposals. So this is one type of way that we are thinking about how to simplify context for these DAO systems that are created on Seasons platform, is to use standard proposals that, again, allow people to create actions that are common across these DAO systems. And that is through human-readable interfaces, so no transaction building, going to Etherscan, pulling a contract and finding the method call, verifying that transaction will go through, et cetera. Just abstract all of that, give them an interface. They can input a number of parameters and execute the proposal, submit it to make it work. And so this is a little GIF that is going to explain or show our interface. We're going through just the transfer ETH proposal currently. So yeah, you can just see it play out. And at that end step, it just sends to our interface and then is able to be voted on by the voting population or the token holders who own pieces of that NFT basket. That's actually all I had. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free. Also, we do have a POAP at our booth, and it's in the back of the conference. It does give you access to a DappCon 22 collection. So if you grab your POAP, we're airdropping those every once a day. So make sure you do that, and you can actually see the interface and play with our application, which we'd love feedback on whenever you have a chance.
Cool, yeah. Thank you, Duncan. We have a few minutes for questions.
maybe I can ask a question too. Like, does anyone have like a super painful experience they've had with DAOs in general? Or yeah.
Not answering your question.
No,
but,
thank you.
have you guys looked at what DAO has done in terms of like harmonizing definitions within DAOs? Because I think one of the initiatives there is around standardizing proposals throughout governance frameworks. So we're together with Key, we were talking about it at Denver in February. I don't know if you've looked at like that standard.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with DAO. I know some of the people from like the MetaGov crew there. And are you talking about the URI that is created there?
Yeah.
Right. So I've looked into it, but I guess I don't. We haven't looked into how to necessarily apply it deeply into our application at the moment.
Okay, we can follow up.
Yeah, we can follow up. That'd be sweet. Yeah, does anyone have any DAO horror stories that you'd like to share?
Yeah, you were talking about UX and context. So what's your process in building these applications? Because I think one of the challenges is, or one of the crucial part of UX is gathering feedback from users, and this is, in my opinion, always a big problem in Web3 because it's not so easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that is definitely one of the biggest challenges in building applications in Web3. We've been fortunate to have a few launch partners that we did work really closely with. So we had a few collections that were launched late last fall that had millions of dollars of NFTs in them. So really quite valuable. They had a reason to really care about the product and it working well. And we had a few assumptions that turned out to be incorrect initially. So we had a few standard proposals. One was add an NFT to get more DAO tokens. The second one was buy out the entire basket of NFTs. It turns out that after some feedback, we found that very few people want to sell the entire basket of NFTs at the same time. They'd prefer to potentially access liquidity by selling an individual NFT one at a time and then distribute that ETH in whatever way suits them. But they can also decide to maybe buy another NFT afterward. And so we restructured the standard proposals, which was a lot of the work that we did in the past 6 months, really, from that user feedback. And then continually, I think there's a lot of problems that we'd still like to solve to make the actual governance system more efficient. One being potentially creating a more benevolent dictator model that has like a check by the general population so that they could veto a decision that is made more unilaterally. But that does make the decision making a bit more accessible for the system today. Currently, the reality.eth and SafeSnap system is still a little bit too complex for most people to actually go in, submit the bond, and play the arbitration game, essentially. So kind of solving for that is one of the primary pain points that we're looking at right now.
I think if there are no more questions, we'll wrap it there. Thank you so much, Duncan. The next talk is at 5:15.